So winning higher value contracts, that's a great subject actually. And my first question would always be, how do we define a higher value contract? For me, it's not just about higher value. In other words, is it 2, 3, 4, 5 times what you would normally consider an average contract value to be? It's equally as much about winning either what we call marquee clients or brand new clients entering into a market that you've perhaps never gone before. I think of winning higher value contracts as being not just the pound value that you're signing, but also the importance to your business on a medium and longer term. And a very simple example of that is that the first order from a new contract could be quite small, but the lifetime value of that client to your business could in fact be business changing. It could be something that defines your business going forward for many years. And of course, pursuing higher value contracts has a couple of upsides and downsides, clearly. The upside is, as I said, it can define your business for many years going forward, generate a lot of revenue. But always worth considering that there's what we call a higher cost of sale, which basically means you've got a higher risk, higher reward opportunity matrix to consider. So what we'll go through today isn't just something that works specifically for higher value contracts. Actually, it can work for all contracts. This might, as I said, be better named plus any new name, marquee, must-win opportunity. But for me, it's really simple. It's when it's really important to you to win this business. So moving swiftly on from that, it's a question of what are we going to cover today? And it's quite simple, really. Before you move into understanding how to win higher value contracts from your side, it's probably equally as important to understand why buyers, procurement departments, whoever makes the decision, what influences them, because that has a direct correlation on what it is that you should be doing at any given time. So let's just have a little focus on that for a minute. There's Lisa's slides. So this is what the webinar will cover. What does it mean for your business, the right resources, processes and tools that you need, and how to select the right opportunities. And first of all, let's think about the buyer's view. What I've popped on screen there is the result of what we call win-loss reviews that I've undertaken for many years. So this is when clients have contacted us and said, we pursued an opportunity, a piece of business with XYZ company, and we would like you to go and find out directly from the company why they bought from us, or actually why they didn't. So this is the buyer's feedback. This is not what the selling organization have said, and the two are quite often very different. You'll notice 2 columns, losses and wins. And without exception, the number one reason that buyers cite for either buying something or not is what we call value proposition. And it's really straightforward. In truth, buyers say to us either the selling organization just didn't get it. They didn't understand what we wanted, and therefore they didn't present us with something that enabled us to understand how we would drive value out of what we would buy from them. They just didn't get it. Conversely, for those who won, they said again, actually, what it was really simple. What they were proposing, the sales organization, had real links to the issues, the opportunities that we had, the problems that we've got, and they were able to articulate it in a language that we understood. In other words, in our language. So just bear that in mind as we go through during the course of the next 40 minutes or so, because it's really important, those 2 things. Value proposition is the be all and end all of this. As you can see, the next 2 items down, relationships and consultative approach, have very much less value in terms of percentages there. Reason for loss on relationships, is an interesting one now, given where we are with COVID, coronavirus, and the way that the sales world, well, in fact, the way the world has changed. Basically, buyers were saying that there were no relationships, and by that they didn't mean that they'd become friends with the sellers. It's they didn't feel that there was a credible business relationship. I will talk more about that later, but it is very closely linked to why people were buying, and that was that buyers appreciate a consultative approach, i.e. not having things what I call thrust down their throat. So it's consultative by sellers who know their marketplace, who know the industry, who know that the competition to those who are buying stuff. So it's consultative approach, business understanding. They're the real reasons from the buyers why they buy and why they don't. Those things all resonate with buyers, but let's step back and let's just have a little look at the process of how you get there, which is what this is about, how you win these larger contracts. So, as I've mentioned earlier, the world of selling has changed, and in some respects, maybe I mistitled this slide. Maybe I should have just said the world has changed. But of course, you know, going back a year, the sales rep, your sales reps would turn up at the banging on the door of their prospects, whether invited or not. And what's the first thing that happens now? And that is that if anybody's actually in the office, they're either not going to let in or they're just going to run away. People don't now want to see the sales reps, which is clearly understandable. And it actually has made a huge difference to the world of sales. Some organizations have adapted very well. Others maybe not so well, or it's being more challenging because the products or the services that they're selling really do need a little bit more personal interaction. It can be done though. The business that I'm in, we talk to clients across the world, and I was talking to somebody in the States, and in fact I got another call with them at 2:30 this afternoon, and they were saying they've just closed a deal with the world's largest retailer, Walmart, for over $5 million US, and they've never been to see the client. It's they've done it completely using Zoom and other types of technology. So this can be done, but in the current world, getting relationships is much more difficult. Taking a consultative approach is therefore more difficult, and demonstrating those real business and domain knowledge is also a lot more difficult. But what are the implications for you? Well, the first thing to say is that selling larger value contracts, the larger opportunities, the big ticket ones, have what we call extended sales cycles, which usually means that if your usual sales cycle to sell something from start to finish is a month or a year, it doesn't matter what it is, that the extended sales cycle can be anything from 2 times that up to 10 times that. So the client approach they take is very, very different to the ones that you're normally used to dealing with, which can be quick turnaround. So business critical sales opportunities require a different approach. Firstly, you need what we call discipline and rigor. I will come back to that when we focus on governance in a few minutes, if that's okay. But that discipline and rigor is in both approach to the opportunity and in the execution of that. And that involves leadership from your business to ensure that everybody who is involved in the sales process has that drummed into them the whole time. Sadly, in some respects, but you're not going to be surprised by this, it requires additional resource, tools, and process to ensure that you deliver on that discipline and the rigor. The additional resources is always a difficult one to swallow, because that usually means spending more money. And that's why, going back to what I said at the start, this tends to be, you know, high cost, high reward selling. Nothing wrong with that at all. You just need to understand that that is part of the challenge as you move to the higher value contracts. The third thing is that you need strong governance and executive leadership. The reason I say strong governance, of course, is that as you put your proposals and your value propositions out to your clients, hopefully they're going to sign up to them. But in order to make sure that you have left what I call nothing on the table, in other words, you are delivering the right solution to your client, the client is getting value for money, but equally, you as a business are ensuring that you make a fair and equitable return on the investment you've made. Sometimes it's important before you deliver that value proposition for your leadership to view the proposal, review the commercials, review the terms, and ensure that there's nothing left on that table that you can extract a little bit more value out of. I hope that makes sense, but let's start on the process now from the beginning. And I think the challenge is that there's an awful lot of process. I'm going to be doing a webinar for AGP again. I think it's about the 11th of December, which talks about sales techniques, sales methods. If you go into Google and do a quick search and just put sales techniques or sales methods or sales processes on there, the Google engine will return very quickly over 1 billion hits. That's 1 billion, not a million, it's a billion hits, which might indicate that there is an awful lot of, let's call it advice out there, guidance, help, depends how you want to see this. I prefer not to think of there being a billion because it's just too many. It's too big a number for me. And you can narrow it down to, you know, the 40 best sales techniques ever, as it says on there. That's actually taken from a book. And my question would be, how much time have we got today? We haven't got time to even consider 40 sales techniques. So please don't worry, we aren't going to cover those. Firstly, I would say don't confuse sales techniques with opportunity qualification. We'll come to that in a minute. But to put it all into context, what I'm going to do is use that's my company's sales management framework as my reference point as we move forward, because there are a number of key elements to the sales process that make the difference between winning and losing business, but more importantly, winning and losing big ticket opportunities. Now, our reference points there really going to focus today on half a dozen of the towers that you see. The first one is qualification. And by that, I mean opportunity qualification. What are the right deals to pursue and how do you choose them? How do you select the ones that you're going to invest your precious resource in? And this one, for me, it's almost the be all and end all of how you sell, because if you do opportunity qualification properly, you will get all the information you need to make the right decision about which opportunities to pursue and what information you need from the clients to be able to put forward to them the right value proposition, a winning value proposition. And we'll talk about qualification in a few minutes, because it really, for me, is the number one area to focus on. We'll also look at relationships. And I mentioned a few minutes ago, that's one of the key things that buyers select and say, you know, either worked or didn't. Clearly, it's much more difficult in today's environment. Then we will focus a little bit of time on how you construct a value proposition. We'll just give you some useful hints and tips. We'll focus a little on pricing, and I know quite a lot of organizations I talk to say, well, we've got a pricing book and we just take from that. So, you know, for some that part will resonate, for others it's really simple. They take it from the right pricing table. We'll come back to that. Then I'm going to focus a little bit of time on close plans. We call them close plans, others call them deal capture plans. It's basically about how you get from where you are today to signing the piece of business. Do you have a plan for that? And has your client bought into it? Have they agreed with you? I'll give you some ideas and techniques on that. And then the final part is what we call win-loss reviews. And that's, if you like, where you learn, where your organization learns, and where we get the continuous improvement loop. Because in order to continually improve, you need to understand why you've got the results you have. So we'll just talk about that very briefly, and how you feed that back through lessons learned right back to the beginning of the whole sales process, lead generation. I hope that makes sense. So what we'll do is we'll take it from left to right, because that takes us fairly logically through the sales process, and we'll move on to opportunity qualification. This is a very busy screen, and for anybody who's been involved in sales for any period of time, you might well know the acronyms that are across there: SPIN, BANT, CHAMP, MEDIC, FAINT, Scotsman, and there are dozens and dozens of other, what you might call, sales opportunity qualification techniques. One or two of those, and I'm thinking SPIN and MEDIC, also claim to be sales techniques in their own right, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't. The first thing for me to say right up front is that qualification is a skill or a technique that is really important for any sales person and for any business organization looking to really use their resources to best effect. Going back many, many years ago, I ran a very large global organization for sales. And we worked out that we were not winning enough business. So we went through across Europe, every one of our sales opportunities, and we knocked out over 50% of them when we did an analysis of them to see, could we win them? And over a 6-month period, we just knocked 50% right out. Do you know what? The amount of revenue that we generated didn't decrease. In fact, it increased, because what we were able to do was take the resources that we were working on the unwinnable opportunities and devote them to those that we had a better chance of winning. And therefore we crafted a much better value proposition, and we imposed discipline and rigor because we had the time to do it. The second, I think, thing that's really important to say is that I wouldn't recommend any of those opportunity qualification techniques necessarily over the others. They're all better than doing nothing, number one. Let me stress that again. Any of them are better than doing nothing. The second thing is that you will notice, if you read some of the descriptions across there, that many of them cover the same elements of a sale, the sorts of things that you want to know. And I'm thinking, if you look at the letter A, you will see that A is in a number of them there, which usually stands for authority. And that really means who has the authority to buy something. Having said that, what any of these will do is give you the hints, if you like, and the techniques to ask the right questions of the organization you're trying to sell to, your client, your prospect. And from that, you can then build your value proposition. And what this is all about, real skillful opportunity qualification, is understanding what are the right questions to ask, and then shutting up. Listen, wait for the information you get back, and to be able to absorb that information, and then to reflect on it and go back and ask clarification questions. All of this is aimed at getting you to do two things. One is to understand what the client's real issues or opportunities or problems are. In other words, what is the business opportunity that they are looking for help from? The second then is, of course, that what that will help you do is understand, do we as a company have the right solution for them? And I'm going to expand on that very briefly, because although I've said that I wouldn't recommend any one of those above any others, and they are all better than doing nothing at all, one or two of them are better suited for different types of sale or opportunity. Mainly, if you are looking to do quick turnaround, smaller value opportunities, you're probably likely to be asking less. If you're selling, I'm not saying you should ask less, by the way, I'm saying that that tends to be what happens. But equally, if you are selling what we call an out-of-the-box solution, something that you don't have to have that is unique, a unique solution to your client, so it's you're selling a commodity type product, then some of the questions are perhaps slightly less relevant, which might make spin or medic. I do quite like, I've got to be honest, for quicker opportunities. It's a good, very strong qualification technique. As you move into the larger value opportunities, for me personally, there is one there that I tend to use more than anything else, and that is Scotsman. And the reason I say that I prefer Scotsman is quite simple. What I've done is expanded onto this slide here the sorts of questions that the acronym stands for, because what it'll do is encourage you to think a little more broadly based, which is really understanding the client's issue, but also focusing on some other things that you really need to get to the bottom of, which is, can you supply and support it? Can it be matched within your current portfolio, or is it something you're going to have to develop? Are you aware of who you're competing against? Are the timescales reasonable? And you'll see from that there are a number of other questions which your salespeople really ought to be able to use to dig into what the client's real issues are. Qualification for me is the be all and end all. It really is. It's where you start, and if you get it right, it makes a huge difference. Of course, having great questioning skills, more importantly, having great listening skills, will help you in what I consider to be the next one, and the thing that I mentioned at the start there, and that is tailoring those questions to suit your specific market opportunities, but then understanding how to build relationships, because relationships don't just form, they're based on mutual respect. And to build the right relationship, you really need to understand who you're talking to within an organization. Organizations, and particularly for large scale, larger value opportunities, the decision process is very different. It tends not to be with an individual. And you may be talking to any one of the groups of people that are actually on this slide here. And that can be, you can be talking to influencers. The growth of what I call the TPI, third party intermediary business, has been phenomenal over the last 10 years. Those are, I'm going to say, you can't see me doing this, but I'm doing inverted commas with my hands, that people who claim to be industry experts, solution experts, they will provide advice to buying organizations about what might be the right solution. Interestingly enough, I'm looking at some research recently, and I've seen 3 examples of it now that says buying organizations are now something like 50% of the way through the procurement process before they ever see a sales executive, before they ever contact you. Clearly, that's not the case for every sales one. Sometimes you'll have the relationship before you start. But it's a really interesting statistic, because what that actually means is that the buyers have done a lot of research on how to solve the issue that they've identified themselves, and that can have been done by themselves. In other words, they've been responsible for doing their own research, or somebody else has got to them first. Now, that could be a competitor, could be an influencer, could be a third-party intermediary. It can be that they've looked at something like the the magic quadrants that seem to be provided for every particular industry supplier now? Who's in the top right magic quadrant for that type of product or service? So you really need to understand who you're talking to start building the relationships which are built on credibility. Are they decision makers you're talking to? And how you and your team interact with those people, and are the influencers, decision makers, talking to your competitors? Do you know if they are? Always good to try and figure it out. However, for relationships, I tend to work on a grid to know who I want to know and how I want to know and where people are positioned. There's no right or wrong answer, but what I'm going to do is give you some thoughts on this fairly rapidly. But for me and prospect and customer relationships, I really want to know who we know and how well we know them. On the flip side of that, of course, is who we don't know. Who we don't know is in some respects more important, because I really need to know why we don't know them and how we're going to get to know them, which is who we need to. And then the final part is the key decision makers and how we can influence them. And I look at people on a grid. So as you can see here, for every individual that we know or we need to know, I like to think of them in 4 different areas there. So what is their status? How do they feel about me, my company? And I put them down and classified them as an ally. Are they a coach to me? Are they a supporter, neutral, non-supporter, and hostile? The worst status for me is unknown. In other words, I know that an individual, Joe Brown, is part of the buying process. I have no clue what they think of us. And that's the one that I always find most challenging. If I know that they're a non-supporter or hostile, I can start to build a strategy for how I move them through that to become an ally of mine. If I don't know, I've no clue what to do about it. What role do they take? Are they the decision makers? Are they a gatekeeper? So trying to understand the role means you can position them effectively. An interesting one that a lot of people talk to us about and ask why is, what career path are these individuals on? Are they fast track? Are they stable? Other is a dangerous one. The reason we look at that is that people within an organization, whether we choose to believe it or not, they have sometimes status outside of their job title. And by that I mean that they may well be somebody whose career path is what we call stable, but actually they have the ear of the chief exec. Maybe they were a founder of the company. Maybe they're a personal friend of the chief exec. We don't know. We like to know what their career path is for sure. We link that to the status of them. Are they a supporter of us? But are they the fox? Are they the person that's well hidden within the sales and buying organization? Fast track people tend to be the ones who are listened to most within an organization. They're those who've perhaps had they've got the respect of the organization. They're seen as future leaders. Steady progress, nothing wrong with that. Others can be dangerous. Specific example of that is for people who've perhaps been, I'm going to say this in the only way I can really, promoted beyond, one step beyond their capability. And these people sometimes will take risks that are designed to help prove to the rest of the organization that actually they can do the job they are, and they will make decisions that sometimes are perhaps not best for the organization, but might be better for them. So always be careful of those types of people. And then the final one is how much contact you have with them or can have with them. And I always ask, if I'm running a face-to-face session with people and they say, I've got frequent contact with the main decision maker, and if I'm sat with them, I'll say, good, pick the phone up now. Let's see how good that contact is. So always be a little circumspect in the amount of contact you say you have with people. That's how I focus on relationships. But relationships are interesting. Never over-egg the relationship you have. Particular story, and the reason I say that is talking to a company, a client of ours a year ago so, before lockdown. I was running a program for them on their existing account directors, and I asked the CEO of one of their major European, a well-known company, to come in and talk to the account directors about what he expects as a CEO from the people who supply him. And he came up with a list of things, but there were a couple of things that really resonated with me. One, he said, "Don't expect me to be your friend," which kind of made everybody sit up and take note, because they'd been taught throughout their careers to develop the relationship. What he actually meant by that was, he said, by that, I mean, I'm not going to be your friend, certainly not in the initial stages, not for some considerable time. I don't need another Facebook contact. Relationships to me mean that you as a supplier will come to me with insight, with knowledge, with some ideas and thoughts, and you will add value to the contact that we have. Bring me something every time we have a discussion, something that makes me sit up and take notice. I might not necessarily agree with you. I don't have to agree with you, but I like a different point of view. The second thing he said, which a lot of marketing people shudder at, was he said, "Neither am I interested in your hospitality. I don't want to go to the rugby with you. If I want to go to rugby, I'll do it myself." So that, two interesting things there as you think about relationships. So they don't all want to be your friend. Think about how you can deliver value to that relationship, and it's all about their business and them. Excuse me while I just take a sip of water there. I spoke briefly about value, because that's the next area that what they're looking for. Every buyer and decision maker, as I said right at the start, when you talk about why you bought or why you didn't, it is that either my supplier demonstrated the real value that they were going to bring, or they didn't. So how do you demonstrate that? What's the best way of putting that forward? And it's an old-fashioned saying, it's a value proposition. And we've got a few tips for you in terms of how you do that. But a value proposition should be something that's easy to really get hold of and remember it. So firstly, every value proposition needs to be compelling. It needs to be something that I look at and think, yeah, I get that, and I can really understand why, if I invest my money in that, I can really see why I will, how the benefits will be delivered to me, whatever they are. It needs to be something I remember. It needs to stand out from the crowd. There's nothing worse than what I call me too value propositions. It's boring. I don't know how much money I've spent for businesses over my career, but it's rather a lot, probably far too much actually. And I've the attention span of a gnat. And I think a lot of people, whether they choose to admit it, are pretty much the same nowadays. And therefore, you need things to stick out and to remember them. It needs to be relevant, and it's not relevant to you. It's relevant to the person who's receiving it. It's to the buyer. It's to the organization. It's not about you, I regret to say. It's about them. And it needs to be relevant to their business and their opportunities. It needs to demonstrate value, and it needs to clearly demonstrate the value, whilst at the same time be differentiated. And that's differentiated from two things. One is what the competitors might do. The second is what they could do themselves, because never forget that you're competing not only with what I would call the usual suspects, but with either do nothing or do it themselves. When we say demonstrate value, by the way, we don't mean it's got to be the cheapest. Far from it. If I went back to the slide that explained why people bought and why they didn't, you will notice that on neither side in the top three is price. Interestingly enough, the reasons why people bought, price came in at number 9, if I recall correctly, out of 10. And the reason that they didn't buy came in at number 4 or 5. So on neither side did it make the top 3. It's important that you demonstrate value. Be different. Use your buyer's language. Be clear. Be credible. and provide the right clarity of what it is you're going to provide. For me, there's a really acid test on that, and that is get somebody independent to review your value proposition, which might be a sentence if it's a fairly short and small service or piece of technology goods you're supplying. A value proposition might be a paragraph. It might be 2 paragraphs. I wouldn't try and expand it beyond 2 because people will struggle to remember more than 2 paragraphs. The simple and acid test is get somebody to review it. Would they buy it? Or look at it yourself and say, really honestly, would I buy it? And if you can't say hand on heart, and oh, by the way, take off what I call your happy ears or your happy eyes and say I'd buy it, then you might want to review that value proposition and give it another go. As it happens, I think that's one of the most difficult things to do in the whole of the sales process. Just from a personal experience, I think getting the value proposition absolutely right is hard work. It can't be done in half an hour. It is difficult. And to get it right involves you having to have asked the right questions in the qualification process. More importantly, to have listened to the answers to that. Moving on, of course, part of the value proposition is that demonstrating value. And demonstrating value is about making sure that you get the right solution in place with the right price. And of course, the question is, what is price? And for a lot of people, it's very simple there. It's the amount of money that you're going to pay for something. It's the price I'm going to pay for it. I think for many of us, and I'm going to say for many of us Brits, it actually becomes it's an uncomfortable conversation. We're not very good at bartering as Brits. Well, I'm certainly not. For me, when somebody says it's £10.50, it's like, right, here you go, here's your £10.50. And that's in the bazaar in the Middle East when they say 10 whatevers, and what they really mean is 1. Well, I'm not comfortable with going, well, look, here's 1. I kind of go, oh, 10, right, here it is. And then I walk away and think I'm happy. And that might not necessarily be the case. In commerce, in what it is that we do, the price, of course, is determined by up to 3 factors. And that is, what's a buyer willing to pay? I'm going to say that again. What is the buyer willing to pay? If you go back to the qualification questions, one of the areas that every technique on there focuses on is budget. Is what have they got, or what can they find, or what can they make available, or what budget will they take from other places to actually source what it is you're going to supply them. So what is a buyer willing to pay? The second is, and this is down to you now, and we talk about leaving stuff on the table, is what are you willing to accept for the provision of those goods or services? The third element is, and this is the one that people sometimes look at me a bit strange on, is what the competition allowed to be charged. There's no point in a buyer saying, I'm prepared to pay 100. If you are not prepared to accept that, then walk away. The competition, of course, may trash the whole of the calculations that everybody works and say, for whatever reason, we're going to come in with a special offer. We've got a new way of doing things. And rather than charging 100, we can do this for 10 now. So, and this is becoming more common as what we call disruptor technology starts to increase in the market. So disruptors are people who found a new way of doing things, and the competition, the disruptors, will change the whole market dynamic about what you can charge and how that works. I spoke about the price that a seller is willing to accept. For a lot of organizations who work on price books, it's really straightforward. Our price books say these are what we can charge for volume related purchases. If you understand what a buyer is prepared to pay and you can't match that, that's a very good time to qualify out of the sales opportunity. Not because you can't win it necessarily, but because you can't achieve a satisfactory return on the effort that you're prepared to put into that. So moving forward from solution and pricing, so understanding by asking the right questions, what's the right solution and what is the right price that we can charge for that, that's fair and equitable to your client and gives you the right return on that, you next need to understand how you're going to close that piece of business, how you're going to capture that deal. And we use the term close planning, but a close plan, it's a really simple tool to ensure that your business aligns your sales process around the customer's buying process so that you both arrive at your agreed sign date perfectly synchronized. For me, it's as much about helping you to organize things. But the big question is, why use one? Because a lot of people go, oh, it's just more paperwork to fill in. Actually, it's not. There are some very good reasons why you would use a close plan first of all. And I'll just highlight those off before I give you a couple of examples of a close plan. But it's really effective ensuring that the customer is serious about buying. In other words, try and work with a customer to create this together by understanding and creating a shared timetable or deadline. What this means is that you need to understand from the client's perspective, from their perspective, what are they looking to do and when? What stages of the buying process are they going through? And what do you need to do to help them achieve each of their objectives, not yours, their objectives. So they may well be saying, for instance, we have a technical evaluation panel on this date. We're looking for proposals submitted to us by this date. We're looking for presentations by this date. You need to understand exactly what those stages are from their side so that you can line up your resource internally to give them the information they need by that date. So what that means for you is you'll benefit by having the roadmap to the contract signature based on your customers' buy-in. So they've said very clearly, here's our stages so that I can get you, the supplier, to help me. It helps both of you to qualify and organize yourselves. From my perspective, it helps me organize the customer actually, because there might be things that I can look at in their process and say, yeah, I understand why you're saying that, but actually that's not realistic. And here are the reasons why. And it could give them more time. If I say you can do something at a bit more leisure, it might shorten the whole process if you can point out why something might not work. Equally as importantly for your businesses, and particularly if you're a business that's got a very strong relationship with your investors, it gives credibility to your forecast and contract sign dates. For any salesperson, they are going to be asked by their leaders, let me have a look at your sales forecast. Let me have a look and see the values of those opportunities and when they're going to sign. The very best of us will never get it right 100% of the time. However, all of us need to be able to be reasonably accurate on that. And particularly when you're reporting to external investors about when revenue and profit is likely to flow, that's a real skill that is there's high value on that. Let me give you a couple of examples of what a close plan might look like. So this particular one here, as you can see, has opportunity details on the top box there. So who the customer is. TCV is just total contract value. It might be lifetime contract value. What stage are we at? Try and use the customer's language rather than yours. When is it likely to be signed? And what do you think your win probability is at the moment? What's the compelling reason for them to sign? Do you know it? If you can't fill that part, go back to square one, qualification. Who's the buyer? Do they have a budget? Do they have the authority? And then more importantly, what are the dates? What's got to happen? There's an action column here. XXX is your company name. Customer is who they are. What action has to be taken by? And I would also put in the action who's got the responsibility. Same with the customer. When dates have got to be that. Equally as importantly, has your customer bought into this? Are they saying, yep, we agree with all this, this works? And what are the risks? Risks can be anything. The risk can be the customer hasn't got the right resource. They're being unreasonable. It can be that you don't have the right resource. It can be an internal department, technology, a supplier. They've said to you, we haven't got the people to help you. We haven't got enough people. We need to go and get those resources. We can't provide the goods. We can't provide the samples in time. Doesn't matter what that is. Really understand what those risks are, what the impact is, and what's the mitigation. How are you going to get over that? So that might be a very simple close plan. A more extensive one can be pages and pages of it if the deal opportunity is very large and is over an extended process. I've seen close plans that are 4 pages long and more. Another way of looking at this might simply be 2 columns. The supplier column on the left, the buyer column on the right, with what events are to happen. So it can be, as I said, you've got a technical presentation to be done. You've got, you're going to attend a Q&A event. And this will say on here, on the left-hand side, what are we going to do? And on the right-hand side, what is it for and when? Nice and simple. You can see very quickly one side to the other, what's happening, when, who's doing what. For me, close plans are really important. I would start a close plan off immediately. You have qualified a deal as being something we're going to invest our time in. I'd start it literally on day one. And it's a living, breathing document that has to be kept up to date accurately, and something that you could take to your chief exec and say, this is the close plan for this deal. And they get it. They'd understand it immediately. They could see the path through to that. Having created your close plan, you submit your proposal. Of course, what happens then? You either win or you lose. For a lot of companies, winning is straightforward. We're straight down to the pub. I was going to say that doesn't work anymore, does it? We celebrate in whatever way. And loss, of course, is you try and bury your head in the sand and you try and work out, how am I going to explain this to my chief exec, my sales leader, my investors, whoever it is. But for many organizations, in fact, I would say for every organization, you really ought to understand why. And for the vast majority of the opportunities you put out there, that might be very simple. You might send out a pre-prepared template via email that's got a series of questions that can either be yes, no, or give us some brief information. But from the buying perspective, why did you buy or why didn't you buy? For the larger opportunities that we're talking about here today, and the more important ones, we would suggest very strongly that you make a personal call to that individual. You have a Zoom call, or even go and see them if the opportunity is worth it, and they'll give you an hour of their time. And have yourself a set of questions or a template and ask some really deep questions about why you made the decision you did. One hint or tip is never let the salesperson or the person responsible for that opportunity, whether it's the salesperson or a sales leader, never ever let the person involved with the deal go and do the interview or ask the questions. The only reason is that what you'll get back from them in there is what we call what might be viewed as vaguely credible, but not necessarily the right information. If you go and ask, if you get an independent person to do it, they will come back with what we expect to be the right information. Once you've got that, collate it together, and most importantly, disseminate that across the rest of your business. In other words, here are the lessons we've learned from this. Here's the strong points that we've got. We can build on those. Here's the weaknesses that we found. What do we need to do internally to fix those? Very, very important to do that. Having said all of that, those are the parts of the tower. The part that we don't put as a particular tower in our sales process, but is really important, is governance. And this for us is how you conduct the internal sales process, including all approval levels, review processes. I mentioned right at the start, if you're putting out really key proposals or potential contract commercial agreements, please, please, please get them reviewed internally so that everybody up to a senior board member even would say, yep, that contract, that commercial agreement is sound. We will sign up to that, and it doesn't give us any foreseeable problems. It's really difficult to go and unwind a commercial deal when you start to suffer the issues from it. Trust me, I've been there, I've done it, and it's painful. Also, it demonstrates fair value both to the client, but to my business as well. It's giving me a fair return on the investment we've made, and ensure that you've got that process documented, understood by everybody, and that as you go through it, somebody signs off and says, yes, I'm happy with that proposal, so that it's very clear 2, 3, 4 years down the track how you got to where you are and why it's delivering that, why that contract is delivering the results that it is or it isn't. To summarize, very simple: understand where you are in the customer buying cycle and what's required of you. Customer buying cycle, not yours, the customer's. Qualify every opportunity, search for evidence, don't be afraid to walk away. Use a close plan on every deal, and I mean that, use one, simple or otherwise, but use something. Focus what's important to your buyers, develop a compelling value proposition, learn from every result, develop a continuous improvement philosophy. If you just use this approach on every opportunity and enjoy selling, it's as simple as that. What I'm going to do is stop sharing. I'm going to start the video again and open up to any questions.
Thanks, John. Lots of information again there. I haven't got any questions on the chat facility, but if anybody wants to come off their mic and ask John direct, now's your chance.
I have a question, if I may. Thanks so much for that. I'm trying to take it all in because that was a lot of information, and we've been doing mainly direct to consumer, running an e-commerce website. So we're now turning our attentions to retail. We do baby products. My question is, how do you stand out to establish that relationship in the first place? Because I've got an account manager. I think we're quite nice, friendly people to do all that good account manager stuff, but it's just standing out from the noise to even start to make that sale for us.
That's a really good question, actually, Hannah, and thank you for asking it. And actually, if I said earlier on, it's even more difficult now with where we are and our inability to go and physically shake a hand and spend some time out. The challenge is it's an interesting one. The key part is, as I mentioned, the buyers don't necessarily want to be your friends, although one or two have said that that might come later. And actually, I've still got friends that I've made from when I've been selling, but it doesn't happen overnight. What it is that buyers are looking for, how you will be differentiated, is the value that you bring to them, not necessarily in the contract that says here's the cheapest product or here's the best commercial deal. It's about other things that they may or may not be interested in. There's a sales technique called the challenger sales technique, and what that is about is not about challenging the buyers, because they don't necessarily like to be challenged, or at least not really directly. It's about helping them to understand maybe some hidden parts of the market that they operate in, some trends that are starting to develop. So for instance, in your scenario, it might be that you're able to say, look, based on our knowledge and experience, there's some really interesting things that are happening. There's some new product, there's some new stuff coming from from the US or from the Far East or whatever. It's bringing to the buyers just some little nuggets of thoughts or ideas that they might not necessarily have considered themselves, or some market knowledge that said, are you aware that your competitors are really starting to develop an interesting proposition in this area here? And if you can demonstrate that while still taking the we're nice to do business with approach, because I never forget, people do buy from people, and ultimately if everything else is equal, all the products are much the same, the pricing's much the same, commercial terms are much the same, everybody without exception will default and will buy from the person they like best. It's not necessarily who they like best. Let me rephrase that slightly more. It's who they want to do business with. And for me, there's a really simple test on that, and it's easy to understand it. It's how do people treat me? And I have the view personally that I kind of, maybe this is a depressing view, I don't know. I sort of think, well, everybody will make a mistake at some stage. We're all humans, of course we do. it's not whether you make a mistake or not, it's what you do after that and how you fix the problem. And buyers at the start don't necessarily know that you will fix all problems. Somehow you have to put that across, and there's a really interesting way of doing that. Don't think that buyers won't review you or won't search for you. They will, but they won't just search for, you know, some of the reviews that you get on Google about your products and stuff like that. They may also look on sites like Glassdoor, which is for, you know, your staff to say, do they enjoy working there? What's the culture like? So never forget that buyers will also do that. So it's not just about what your products are, it's about the culture of your business. It's about how you treat people. But first and foremost, deliver value to them. And secondly, be the people they want to do business with. Not necessarily because you're nice, but because you'll do the right thing.
Thanks ever so much. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a pleasure.
Thanks, Hannah. Anyone else?
Hello. I do have a couple of questions. I do have to jump off onto another call though.
I'll make it quick, or else you can jot it down and I'll come back to you. Happy either way, Emily.
If I could jot it down and ping you an email or something, that would be fantastic, John.
Yes, of course you can. Lisa, will you be putting my email contacts out to everybody?
I'll pop them down, yeah, when I send out if anybody wants the slides, you're welcome to have the slides, but I do need your AG3 signed and sent back to me for those, and then I can send those out to you. And I'll also pop John's email address on that as well, so that if you need to contact him, you can just go direct to him then. That's not a problem.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I will. I'll get back to you, Emily.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, it's been fantastic, John. And Lisa, thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily.
Pleasure.
Anyone else with a question now? Or again, I'll pop John's details on there. So if anything does come up and, you know, you've forgotten about, then you can just contact John there. But just please get those AG3 signed and back to me as soon as possible, please.